Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, a new report has revealed that Britain has an increasingly left-wing view on the economy. The annual British Social Attitudes Survey found 48% of Britons are in favour of raising taxes to pay for public services. But we're more conservative when it comes to our thoughts on security, with more than half saying the state should have stronger powers to tackle terrorism. And when it comes to our personal lives, we Brits very much believe that that is up to the individual. So what does it all mean? Here to help us make sense of the findings, the report's co-author Miranda Phillips and also Jamie White, who's a research director at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you both for joining us. Miranda, to you first. Are you surprised that Brits appear to be happy for more tax and more spending?
I think it's clear that this is a reaction against the austerity programme that we've been experiencing over the last few years. We've reached now 48% who would favour higher taxation for spending more on public services. But before we get too carried away, let's not forget that actually it was far higher in the 1990s. So I don't think it's a surprising level. It seems that the public have just responded to what the government have been doing.
Why do you think that is, Jamie? Have we all got short memories? Have we all forgotten the 70s and 80s?
Yes, I'm afraid that probably is the explanation. Not just short memories, but short range of attention overseas. I mean, Yugoslavia, Venezuela is just going through an economic collapse, pursuing the kind of policies that are now popular, with young people apparently voting for Jeremy Corbyn and so on. So I'm very concerned about this short memory, short attention span.
And Miranda, what about civil liberties, national security? We all seem to be a lot happier for the government to crack down on civil liberties if it means we're safer. Perhaps that's no surprise given the events in Manchester and London over the last few weeks.
Well, it's clear that Britons want a strong state when it comes to dealing with national security. So half of us favour detention without trial for an indefinite period at a time of terrorist threat. And that's a strengthening of the powers the government already has. So yes, there's certainly an appetite there for a strong state. We even see levels of 8 in 10 who would be happy for video surveillance in public areas. But it is worth noting that this isn't a change. Views on this have been stable or fluctuating, but only slightly over time. And I should say too that when we spoke to people, that actually was before the most recent attacks in Manchester and London. So we can't see this as a response to the most recent climate.
I suppose it's interesting to think, isn't it, Jamie, whether actually those views may have hardened in the last month?
Well, when people feel threatened, they usually become more illiberal. It seems to me, I'm on top of the statistics as well as I should be, that there was a great, after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, there was a general liberalising of attitudes. People were, both in social areas, personal life, and in economics. And I think the effects of the financial crisis and now more security problems is making people look to the government to protect them. And they think that they get protected by the government diminishing other people's liberty. If other people are reasonably free, they're going to use that freedom to hurt you. That's the idea. And this is a common idea about free markets, that in a free market you are, as you enter a free market to do business, to sell your labour, to buy things, you're going to be injured by the people who you interact with, and the government must protect you from that. I think this is a completely misguided idea, but it is the idea being peddled, and it seems to be catching on.
Miranda, though, you know, if we are feeling that, equally, in terms of personal civil liberties, we are more and more relaxed, aren't we? Especially about same-sex relationships. From the 80s to now, a real sea change in general public reaction to that.
Yes, that's true. So at the National Centre for Social Research, we've been tracking attitudes to things like same-sex relationships and sex before marriage for over 30 years now. And this is an area of public life where we've seen the most dramatic shifts in terms of public attitudes. So on same-sex relationships, back in 1987, it was just 11% who said that they were not at all wrong. And that's risen to 64% in the latest survey. So that's a huge shift from a very small minority to a clear majority thinking that.
And with sex before marriage as well, it's surprising to think that, you know, you only have to go back to the 80s and half of the population thought essentially that this was wrong, didn't they?
That's right, it was actually less than half. It was around 4 in 10 in the 80s thought that sex before marriage was not at all wrong. So the majority felt it was wrong in some circumstances at least. Now 75%, so 3/4 of us say it's not at all wrong. It really has become a new consensus or norm in society, and that's being driven by changing attitudes of traditionally more conservative groups like older people and also religious groups.
I mean, Jamie, is it anything to do with the fact that, you know, people do get older, they pass away, and their views are slightly lost with them as they go?
Yeah, I suppose there is an element of that. I mean, there clearly has been a change around personal liberties regarding your sex life and so on. There has been a change of attitudes, but I think you've got to be careful with these surveys in terms of what they're really measuring. I think that often people give the answer of what they say, that what they think they should think, not necessarily what they do think. So, for example, a lot of people say they'd like the government to increase tax. Well, they're free to send their money to the government. The government will take donations. So if they're really, really keen to pay more tax, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. So I think sometimes when people say things like, I want to pay more tax, it's really virtue signalling rather than a serious statement of what they actually want to do. And sometimes, you know, people say, they might have said in the past that they disapproved of gay marriage because they thought they ought to, even though in fact they really didn't. And some people may today say that they don't disapprove of it because they think they shouldn't, when in fact they really do. So it's hard to disentangle some of these effects.
But Miranda, in terms of virtue signalling, when you looked at the questions you asked about Brexit, it does appear that it was very polarised along age lines, and that was something that we did see reflected, indeed, in the referendum.
That's right. I mean, I would say that when you're looking at the top level findings, so when we look at the public as a whole, it might be easy to think that about some of these statements. But what's clear is actually if you look at breakdowns by subgroups, if you look at age or education or whether someone's religious or not, and you see how patterned attitudes are by those characteristics, then I think it's harder to argue that people are just giving the answer that they think should be expected. And you're right that on Europe, there is a very large social divide between young, more educated people on the one hand and older, less educated people on the other. The former group are much more likely to think that immigration is good for our economy. The older, less educated are more likely to say it's bad for the economy. And we know that immigration and those social divides on it were at the heart of the Brexit vote. OK, there we will leave it, I'm afraid. Miranda Phillips and Jamie White, thank you both very much.